They were high school sweethearts that got married and had a kid. It's the Bruenigs. In the swamp of DC, they tweet all day, but that's okay. They're the Bruenigs. She is a journalist. He is a wonk. Wonk, wonk, wonk. They talk about the news or whatever they want. In the fight for justice, they're on your side. You can't deny it's the
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to our low-effort, low-quality podcast. It is just me today, Matt Bruenig, your host. Liz is on vacation, I suppose, but we'll be back later this week. I believe we're going to record another episode on Friday with the two of us. But for now, I'm just going to do a little solo stuff. So if you're into that thing, you're in for a treat. If you're not, you're not in for a treat, I guess, is what follows from that. So for the solo episode, I want to cover two subjects, maybe only one, depending on how carried away I get. But the first subject is going to be the welfare state. Now, of course, I've written a lot about the welfare state over the last, what is it now? 8 years, 9 years? I don't know how long I've been doing this. But I've never sort of podcasted about it abstractly. And some people, they love the podcast method for hearing about things. And, it's interesting for me as well to kind of rehash it and go through it and see where I go when I have to kind of talk about it off the cuff, which is a little bit different from composing a piece. And then the second thing is MMT, modern monetary theory. That's been hot in the news lately. I've written some things on that, and I thought, again, might be a little bit repetitive of stuff I've written, but some new stuff communicated in a different way, interesting to the folks who like to hear this sort of stuff on their commutes instead of read my 1,500-word blog posts. So let's get at it. The welfare state, what is it, what it's about, that sort of thing. And before I get into what the welfare state is about, I have a sort of general theory of the welfare state, or at least a general theory of why everyone, or I should say, a general theory of how everyone has the welfare state wrong. They don't understand what it's about, at least in the United States, and that this leads to widespread political dysfunction, all sorts of really bad arguments, all sorts of really bad positions, extreme confusion, etc. I understand the welfare state, of course. I understand all things welfare, but most people do not. And most of the people who write and who do punditry on it, I would say, don't really get it. And the main thing that they don't get, or I would say the fundamental error about the welfare state in the United States, is that people believe that the purpose of the welfare state is to redistribute from the rich to the poor. That's the belief. That is sort of the widespread thing. Oh, here's what the welfare state is for. You've got rich people, and they've got too much money, and we're going to grab it, and then we'll give it to poor people. And that's what it's about. It's about rich to poor redistribution. And that belief sort of leads to dysfunction all across the political spectrum. So conservatives, because they understand the welfare state that way, and everyone does, but the way that they respond to that understanding is they'll say the welfare state is theft. It's there's the makers, the rich and successful, and the winners, and then we're taking it and we're giving it to the losers and the failures and the takers and that sort of thing, right? They'll talk about the welfare state as being about envy, that kind of thing, right? So they really lean into the notion of that this is rich to poor redistribution and all of the dysfunctions that go along with that. For centrists who have really imbibed this understanding of the welfare state, they get really into means testing. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense if you believe the whole point of the welfare state is to redistribute from the rich to the poor, you go, well, shouldn't the payments only be for poor people? I mean, if we're trying to redistribute from the rich to the poor, then why would we give money to affluent people? Why would we, pay to have Donald Trump's kid go to college or whatever, right? That's sort of where they wind up. And again, you could see a straight logical line from, well, we're trying to redistribute from the rich to the poor, so we should only give to the poor, right? That's how that goes. For leftists, not all leftists, but there's a sort of line of thought on the left, I feel like, is a bit of a kind of radical posturing, perhaps to some degree. But what they'll say is the welfare state is a Band-Aid for the real problem, which is that the rich, defined as, the capitalist class or high-paid workers, executives, etc., it's that they get so much in the first place, right? They're stealing from everyone, at a first gloss, and then we come in and we take a little bit of it and we give it back, right? So they steal from you in one hand, and then through the welfare state, we tax and transfer some of it back to the victims of the theft, right? The exploited, the working class, etc. So they view the welfare state as avoiding the fundamental, confrontation that we need to have, which is to stop the rich from being so rich in the first place, right? What we need, and this is a word that actually I would say more centrists use, but that this idea kind of leans into, is they'll say we need essentially pre-distribution, right? Stop redistributing after the fact. We need to cut off the rich in the first place and deliver to the poor in the first place. Higher wages, lower profits. Higher wages, lower CEO pay, right? And then we won't need the welfare state, right? We don't need to redistribute to the rich from the rich to the poor if we don't have rich and poor in the first place, in the way that the sort of basic economy works. I don't know if basic economy is the right word, but the first instance of distribution, the market distribution. If we could just get the market distribution flattened out, then we wouldn't have this issue. So that's where everyone goes with that, and you get it, right? If we're redistributing from the rich to the poor, those are the sort of set of perspectives you might have about that kind of policy, at least if you're trying to be critical, right? Obviously, some people are like, oh, that's good, thumbs up, let's do it. But I mean, among people who want to be critical, that's where that tends to go. But this understanding of the welfare state is a mistake. The purpose of the welfare state, the fundamental purpose of the welfare state, is not to redistribute from the rich to the poor. That's not what those aren't the relevant groups that you need to be thinking about. The real purpose of the welfare state is to redistribute to non-workers. That's really the whole game. We're trying to get money to people who don't work. And I think people shy away from this a little bit because that seems to be quite an offensive thing to throw out. People are like, what? Money to people who don't work? No, what? They should work. What we should get them working. What you should, if you don't work, you shouldn't get paid, etc. Right? No money for lazy people. Like that. That's where people go with it. And even the left, you see this to some degree, because people will be like, we should just get people who aren't working, get them into work, get them jobs. Right? You see this to some degree among people who advocate for job guarantee. They've put out papers. Like Randy Ray or Stephanie Kelton put out a paper in, I think it was 2010 or maybe 2012, saying the war on poverty was a failure because all it tried to do was transfer money to the poor. But don't you know, we got to get them working. They shouldn't, be in the position they are in the first place, to where they're having to rely on the welfare state. We could just get them in jobs, and that's really what's going to solve the poverty, right? So this is a way a lot of people go. Or I should say, this is perhaps a way of framing the welfare state that is very uncomfortable for a lot of people, which maybe explains why people don't tend to go with that framing. But it is the correct framing. The point of the welfare state is to give money to people who do not work. And to understand why you need to do that, it is useful to think about the way capitalism distributes income. Now, the primary socialist complaint over the years has been that, in a capitalist system, you have a capitalist class, which tends to be a rather small percentage of the people. They own almost everything. The U.S., the top 10% owns 77% of the wealth. The top 1% owns, I think, something like 40%. The bottom half owns nothing, right? And that group, the capitalist class, they get a big chunk of what we produce, even though they don't necessarily do anything for it. They just own things, and sort of free money for them. And so that has sort of been the socialist struggle. Well, we need to expropriate the capitalist class and give to the workers, and so on, right? And that's all well and good. I'm for that, but that sort of treatment of the economy, which I think a lot of people share in, understands basically capitalism or the economy generally as consisting of two kinds of people who somewhat overlap depending on if you're a capitalist who also works. It conceives of the economy as having workers and having capitalists, right? People who work and produce, and people who own and receive some of the product of the economy, even though they may not themselves work. Right? It conceives of the economy as consisting of those two groups of people. But there's also a third group of people, and that's people who don't work and don't own, or maybe own just a little bit, right? So we could think of workers, capitalists, and non-workers. That third group of people, non-workers. A capitalist economy, and when I say non-workers, I'm also assuming that they don't own very much, because if they owned a bunch, we'd put them in the capitalist bucket, right? So workers, capitalists, non-workers. Non-workers don't get anything under capitalism, right? Because the way capitalism works is it pays income to the factors of production. What are the factors of production? You got land, labor, and capital. Sometimes land and capital are joined together and just called capital. I don't mean to offend Georgists or folks like that, but you've got the land and the structures and the equipment and the assets, and you've got that stuff, and money is paid to those things. Actually, not to those things, but to the people who own them. Very crucial distinction. And then you've got labor, right? Working, right? That's how capitalism pays out the entire, what they call, factorial distribution of income. It either goes to workers or it goes to capital. It either flows to labor or it flows to capital. That's, and we fight over that pie, and, maybe labor should get more, maybe capital should get more, etc. But that's the only thing capital is interested in compensating. It has no interest and no real ability to get money to people who don't work, to non-workers, that third class. It has no ability to do that. And so if you want that group of people not to die, right, or not to be poor, or, if you want to not have a huge underclass or lots of inequality or whatever, you got to get income to those non-workers. That third class has to get income. And that's what the welfare state is for, right? So we can quibble all day about maybe the workers should own all the capital and all this sort of stuff, but even if you solved all that, you still got this third group of people, non-workers, who need income. And that's what the welfare state is for, is to get them income, right? Now, you might say, well, okay, non-workers, well, they need to work, but here's where the rub comes in. Almost all the non-workers in the economy, about half the people in the U.S. do not work. Half of the population, we have, 320 million people, about half of them don't work, right? They're not engaged in labor, right? So who are those people, right? And the answer is they basically consist of 6 groups of people. Right? There are 6 groups of people who don't work in an economy. You've got children, right? Don't work. That's why I put out the Family Fun Pack. The whole idea of the Family Fun Pack is to get resources to children. They don't work, so you got to get the money somehow, right? So why not the welfare state, right? So children, that's group 1 among the non-workers. Second, elderly people, right? Retired people. You got to get them something. We have Social Security, old age pension for them. And then we've got disabled people, right? People who have a work-limiting disability. They may not be, they could also be children or elderly, but I'm talking about people who aren't children or elderly, but who are, working age disabled people. They got to get money. How are they going to get money? The welfare state, right? The fourth group, students, right? People, usually younger adults, they're still in college. Some people sometimes will say, oh, no, they're working, they're in school. But I mean, I don't know. Like, a lot of people who don't work are working as well, like stay-at-home parents and that sort of thing. But point being, they're not engaged in market labor, right? I don't know if going to class is a job, but, however you want to describe it, they're not engaged in market labor. They're not going to receive any income for what they do from the capitalist system. So you got to find a way to cover them, right? And so, right now we use loans. You could also pay living grants, of course, tuition subsidies. There's a whole set of student benefits that usually exist in a welfare state. It's to take care of them, right? So that's sort of group number 4. Group number 5 is unemployed people, right? These are people, I just lost my job, or maybe I'm just getting into the labor market. Maybe I just graduated high school. I've never had a job before. I'm going out looking, right? Those are unemployed people. Those folks also need money, right? Unemployment benefits. That's what that's for. And then the final group of people are caregivers, right? People who are, maybe they have young children in the home, right? They're taking care of kids in the home. Those are caregivers. They are working, right, in the same sense that maybe some other people work, but they're not engaged in market labor, and they're not going to get paid for what they're doing, right? And then it's not just people who might be taking time off to care for kids in the home. They might also be caring for a disabled relative. They might be caring for an elderly relative, right? But they're doing all this, essentially for free. They don't get paid for it because, capitalism only pays out to, people who are engaged in this sort of market exchange, and caring for family members in a decommodified way will not get you any cash. But for those people, of course, the welfare state could give them cash. And I know we've talked about the Family Fun Pack. A big part of the Family Fun Pack is getting money to people who are caring for kids, whether that's because they're taking time off because they've just had a kid, aka parental leave, or if they're doing childcare in the home, also get payment, aka the home childcare benefit, right? So the Family Fun Pack takes care of some of the carer issues, the getting money to caregivers. But yeah, so I mean, if you kind of take a step back again, we got 6 populations: children, elderly, disabled, students, unemployed, and caregivers. Those 6 groups of people, they make up, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I've written some pieces about this in the past. Like, honest to God, it's like 90% or more of people who aren't working fall into one of those 6 categories. The other 10%, you have some residual group of people. You have some people who aren't elderly, but who are nonetheless retired. Like maybe they retired at age 55 or something like that. That's a big chunk. And then you have some others who the hell knows? I don't know. They just recorded as other in the current population survey. So I don't know what they're up to. But overwhelmingly, the vast majority of non-workers fall into one of those 6 categories. And so the welfare state is fundamentally about supporting all those people, right? And so when people have these debates about like, well, should we means test this? Aren't people this and that? They're missing the boat, right? Because we're trying to support all of them. It's trying to support all the kids. Right? We're trying to support all the disabled people. We're trying to support all the elderly people. We're trying to support all the students. We're trying to support all the unemployed people, all the carers. We're trying to get sources of income for all those folks. That's what the sort of social democratic universal welfare state is all about. Right? And if you understand it that way, things start clicking in very clean ways, right? Instead of the welfare state looking like this sort of mess of like, what the hell are we doing here? We have some programs that phase out, some that phase in means. And so you're like, no, it's actually very beautiful. It's a very beautiful, clean edifice, right? We have a program for each of these 6 groups of people. We might have multiple, depending on the situation. And that's their income. Just as a worker gets a wage, and a capitalist gets their dividend, the non-worker gets a welfare income. Whether that's an old age pension, a disability pension, a child allowance, an unemployment check, they get their income, right? Everyone gets an income. You get an income. You get an income. You get. Oh, you're a student. All right, here you go. Oh, you taking time off because you just had a kid. All right, here's money for you. Oh, you're retired. All right, here's some money for you. Right? Everyone gets an income, whether you're a wage worker or an owner or you're this third group of people. Now, of course, we've had this discussion before. The owners, I don't understand why they get an income for what they do, or more accurately, don't do. But, that's for another episode. And so when you understand it this way, right, we could kind of go back and you could kind of clear up a lot of, I think, to some degree, the confusions and the weird rhetoric that, surrounds the welfare state. Right? The conservative notion that, oh, this is theft. You're taking from the rich and giving to the poor. It's like, no. Right? I'm resolving the fact that the economy has no way of getting resources to people who don't work. Right? Like, you could starve them to death, I guess. It's half the population, including all the children. But like, if you want to have any kind of equal society in which, people who have disabilities or people who've lost their job can live decent, stable lives and dignity, et cetera, the welfare state's the only, proven way to really do that, right? Certainly in industrial or post-industrial capitalism, the only societies that have found ways to give those folks good lives have done so through welfare states. Right? For centrists who are like, oh, we need some means tests. We need to means test. We need to means test. No, bullshit. You don't need to means test, right? I don't care what, a disabled person might have in the bank, or maybe they have a spouse who makes good money. I don't give a shit, right? It's not about that. It's about supporting them. They're disabled. They deserve an income just like everyone else, regardless of how rich or poor they might be. And of course, if they are rich, they're going to pay higher tax. And so we'll take care of it there, And the same thing for children, right? And this again, I will go into the family fun pack here, but the idea of means testing children's benefits is, based on this rich to poor logic. In fact, one of the people who wrote a criticism of the family fun pack was like, oh, if we're trying to get benefits to the neediest, why are we giving a child allowance or free child care to people who are affluent and that sort of thing? This is actually a conservative who wrote this. And what he misses, and what everyone misses about the welfare state, again, is the point is not redistributing from rich to poor. The point is redistributing from workers and capitalists to people who don't work. That's the point of it. And so that's why we're doing that, because we're trying to get resources to the kids. And what's important, especially in the context of, and you can see this really clearly with children, though it's true of all 6 populations, is we're not only trying to even out the distribution between sort of poor families and rich families. I mean, it does have that effect, even though you're not shooting at it, right? The welfare state just does have that effect. Even if you have universal social democratic benefits, it nevertheless does involve a lot of net redistribution from rich to poor. But that's not the only thing we're trying to do. We're also trying to even out what is sometimes called horizontal inequality, right? So you have vertical inequality, which is like rich to poor, right? Like, oh, you've got the retail workers on the bottom, and then you've got the CEO at the top, right? And that's sort of vertical inequality. And, one thing we're trying to do, or one thing we happen to do with the welfare state, is we happen to shrink the differences between those groups of people. So we reduce vertical inequality. Horizontal inequality is when you have 2 people who are otherwise similar, but because they have a disabled relative or something like that, their standards of living are way different. So you might have someone who's like, oh, you've got a retail worker and a retail worker, but the one retail worker has 3 kids and the one has 0. Right? We're trying to level out. One of the things we're trying to do is level out the differences between those 2 groups. But then that's also true for the CEO or the high-paid lawyer, right? You might be like, oh, a high-paid lawyer has $150,000 a year. Why do we need to give them welfare benefits for their kids? And it's like, well, because if that high-paid lawyer is making $150,000 a year and they have 3 kids, and then there's another high-paid lawyer who's the same as them, but they have 0 kids, they're living very different lives, right? And so if we want real equality throughout the whole sort of social stratification system, then we want to make sure that the lawyer with 3 kids has the same kind of life as a lawyer with 0 kids, or the lawyer who's living with a disabled relative has the same kind of life as a lawyer who's not living with a disabled relative, right? We're trying to level out horizontal equality or inequality, just as we're trying to level out vertical inequality. And so the welfare state, or I should say a universal social democratic welfare state, does that very, very well, right? Because think about it. Any given person, they kind of live in a family or household unit, right? They live in a unit with other people and they kind of share resources within that unit. And the idea is of the social democratic welfare state is to say each one of those units, every person in that unit should have an income specific to them, right? So that no matter what kind of unit you find yourself in, you're basically covered and you're going to be, relatively equal, right? So you might find yourself in a unit where you've got 2 kids and a disabled uncle, and you're sort of trying to make it all work. You're the only one who maybe has a job, right? Or you might find yourself in another one where you have 2 elderly parents that you're taking care of and a college kid, right? You can find yourself in all sorts of mixtures, all different little units, little pods that are sort of sharing resources with one another. And the idea of the welfare state is to say, we're going to make sure that those pods are level so that if you're someone who you could be double income, no kids family with 2 working age adults, that's one kind of family, one little resource pod you could be in, or you could be in this pod where you're a single mother with 3 kids. But we're going to level all that out, right? Because all 3 kids will have their incomes as well. Each one of them will have a child allowance, right? You throw in a disabled uncle, that guy's got a disability pension, right? So you can mix and match people however you want, right? It doesn't have to be, you have to do this real strategic thing where you're like, man, okay, we need to make sure we have enough workers for enough dependents, right? Oh, we can't take in mom because we're not bringing in enough income. And instead of having to sort of micromanage how you arrange your familial relations, how you arrange your living situations and that sort of thing, the idea is that no matter what living situation you find yourself in, the social democratic welfare state's got you covered because it's giving an income specific to each kind of individual in society, right? So hopefully I didn't sort of go on too long with that point, but I think it's very, very key because you kind of see the beauty of it when you think about it. When you think about it that way, as opposed to just this sort of weird, kludgy way to move income from the top to the bottom, right? It does do that, but that's really not what it's aiming at fundamentally. So I feel like if we could get that across a little bit better, the idea of the social democratic welfare state would click so much better, right? And all these centrists who complain about, this is, you're wasting money by not means testing, you could just slap them off and be like, you're a moron, you don't know what you're talking about, right? And then of course to some degree you have this sort of radical leftists, who are, this is a band-aid. It's like, no, you're wrong, dude. Like, you got to get income to people who don't work. Like, you just do. This is not some band-aid on, steal from one hand and, pay taxes on the other. That's really not what it's about. So yeah, that's the welfare state, and about 30 minutes in. So I guess we could switch to the next topic, which is MMT. But before that, I want to read Jared's Corner. And we did Jared's Corner for the first time last episode. So hopefully you guys heard that. If you didn't, Jared's Corner is constructed by a gentleman named Jared Merrick. He lives in Kentucky. He loves the takes. He's all over the takes all the time. Unbelievable. He's banned from Twitter, unfortunately, and so instead of tweeting anymore, he just emails me everything he emails me his tweets, basically, and it's wonderful. It's the best usage of my inbox anyone has. But a long time ago, I asked him to give me little snippets, like longer sort of paragraphs of his thoughts, and I used to include them in a newsletter. And now I've asked him to do the same thing for inclusion in the podcast. So here is his Jared's Corner. The title of this Jared's Corner is Daily Exercise, Running from the Devil. That's the title. Daily Exercise, Running from the Devil. All right, get ready. Why is it the author wishes to make recreational cocaine legalization a signature policy? To fix deforestation, plus diabetes, plus immigration, plus mass incarceration, plus productivity deceleration. Intensify, intensify, intensify. Trudeau plus Chrystia Freeland ought to fix their problems via livable UBI now. Cow hashtag chemical Assad. Move the Alawites to the northwest. Let Pompeo underscore Bolton underscore Haspel take down Damascus Mecca Mafia ASAP. Hemp, hemp, hemp. Vocalize flight shaming. Vocalize flight shaming. Vocalize flight shaming. Aggressive air travel shaming's good. Stupid idiot Gen X centrists flying to the same place to see the same people to eat the same meal every November plus December? Do academic conferences on Twitter plus YouTube. Do business meetings on Twitter plus Skype. DJT won the shutdown, literally. Nashville's Jim Sewer Cooper must be taken down. Stop pissing me all the way the fuck off. IndieWire's top 100 films list directed by women gets pretty thin. No Duras, no Von Trotta, no Miranda July, no Josephine Decker, no The Love Witch. Works and Nights and Days contained 175 films. Spike Lee got ridiculed for his NYU syllabus, which consisted of 87 titles with 0 by women. The corner list was limited to 1 film per director. Works and Nights and Days was penned pre-Robert Kraft arrest. Cancel Cumtown. Sports writers are trash. Netroots Nation blocked UBI activists from setting up booths/presentations every year until last year, but why? Perhaps Yang's a better general candidate than hashtag Feel the Burn. Best Living American Actor Filmography. Keitel, then De Niro, then McConaughey, then DiCaprio, then Pitt. Best Living French Actor Filmography. Jean-Pierre Lude, then Isabelle Huppert, then Catherine Deneuve, then Michel Piccoli, then Gerard Depardieu. So there you have it. That's Jared's Corner. A lot of insight there. You might need to replay it, unpack it. It's sort of got a kind of a horoscope type quality to it. Make of it what you will. Anyways, moving on to the modern monetary theory. So there were a lot of writings about this lately. Doug Henwood had a piece in Jacobin Magazine. I had a couple pieces at People's Policy Project. There have been pieces written in the past, few months from Max Sawicki, from J.W. Mason. Larry Summers had something in the Washington Post. Paul Krugman's been writing about it at the New York Times. There's a sort of little publishing blip, I guess, if you will, about it. And I would say 95% of the people who are being exposed to this stuff seem to be just like, I have fucking no idea what this is or what anyone's talking about. And I can appreciate that because, frankly, even as someone who knows a lot about this general subject area, figuring out what the hell people were even talking about took me a while. When I first heard about it, like back in 2013. So I could appreciate that, but I figure, maybe there are some people who are like, what the fuck's going on, who nonetheless might be interested in me trying to sort of break it down a little bit. So I try to do that here. But for starters, right? So what are we doing with modern monetary theory? Modern monetary theory, I mean, what is it defined by? Like, if you just say, what is it? What's the theory? Like, can you point it to me? Like you could point to me, oh, well, Keynesianism is, and you can kind of point to me like a number of papers, a number of concepts, monetarism is, oh, well, here's this, Milton Friedman, etc. Like this sort of, there are sort of concrete animating ideas. There are research agendas. There's, it's you think about, what was it, the like October School or whatever, right? Like there are all these sort of, I don't know, like theoretical developments that occur or in different areas of study, and ideally these theoretical developments, they have a life of their own, right? They're the nature of academics and intellectualism and so on is we're reasoning people, and I can put down an idea and anyone else can pick it up and run with it or modify it or whatever. MMT, I would say, as a general matter, is much it's very different from this. If you were to say, what is it? And you were to actually try to descriptively answer, like, what it is, like, where is it? Like, how do I know what it is? The answer to that question would be, well, there are like 10 people in the US, and I guess like a couple in the UK and Australia. And MMT just is like the shit that they say. Like that just is what it is. Like, and they don't always say the same things, right? So like the guy in Australia, Bill Mitchell, he says like shit that people in the US seem to not like. And then like Warren Mosler, who is supposed to have been like the founder of MMT, he says shit that then gets critiqued by other MMT or other like prominent MMTers in the US. And so you're like, what is this then? Like, you guys all believe the same thing, yet you all say different things. Like, so I don't know I mean, sometimes people call it a brand. It's sort of a brand. I guess you would say it's a school of thought in the literal sense, in the same sense that like, Adorno and Horkheimer were in the Frankfurt School. And you're like, well, what are these people? Well, I don't know. They're just sort of a group of people. They associate and they say shit that gets lumped together. Like that, I think is the most accurate description of what it is. Sometimes people will take that understanding of it and say, oh, well, this is sort of like a cult, isn't it? Like you know what MMT is by pleading to dear leader to tell you what it is. You can't sort of work it out on your own. But yeah, I would say that is probably the best way to describe what it is, but obviously is not good for podcasting and trying to like talk through the issues. But if we put aside that for a second, right, what are the sort of fundamental things that a lot of them talk about? And I would say the fundamental thing about MMT, the thing where you're like, oh, here they all agree, and here's sort of, I guess, the jumping off point of all of it is a kind of a tedious sort of bullshit, I don't know, exercise, it seems like to me, is what they'll do is they'll go, spending, when the government spends money, it actually just creates that money and then spends it, right? So you guys, simple brain out there, you guys are like, well, the government, to spend money, it has to tax or it has to borrow. And MMTers not only say, no, it doesn't, but also say, no, it never, no, taxes and borrowing, that's not even, any of that has anything to do with spending. Spending is always, sometimes they'll say, quote unquote, self-financed. Spending is always that the government creates money and spend it. The taxing, borrowing, that's never used to fund spending. You're just wrong. And the reason why I call this tedious is, one, it's completely not new to say that the government can create money and then spend it. In fact, there is a word for that, which is called seigniorage. This is a very old word. It's been used, I mean, as far as I can tell, for hundreds of years. But like the basic idea of seigniorage is, the government creates money. It's the currency issuer. So the government can create money and then spend it. And then the sort of purchasing power it gets from doing that, the amount of that is called seigniorage. Right? Pretty simple. And what I guess is a little bit weird is they don't use the word seigniorage very much. And I guess I find that strange because I feel like if you used it, a lot of people who, I don't know, follow this stuff would understand it really well. And I also kind of sort of conspiratorially think that's the reason it's not used. But like that's the basic idea is like taxes and borrowing don't fund spending. Rather, all spending is seigniorage. right? All funding is seniorage. And that's like, I don't know. Okay, I guess you could see it that way if you want. But the next question is, okay, well, if all taxes are seniorage, what does that mean? Are you saying the government can just print money and just spend, like we could just eliminate taxes and borrow? We wouldn't need to have any of that. We could just print money and spend it. I mean, if it's all self-financing and if it's all funded by seniorage, then what do we need taxes and borrow? I mean, what are we doing any of that for? Just print it and go. We could, all taxes are 0% now, right? But then when you push them on that point, right, and you go, wait, they go, oh, well, not quite. You can't spend, the U.S. spends 38%, the government in the U.S. spends 38% of GDP. You can't just, turns out, print 38% of GDP worth of money and spend it into the economy. That wouldn't work very well. And you say, well, why wouldn't it work very well? What would be the issue there? Well, we cause inflation. We cause pretty severe inflation. Oh my. So we do need taxes. And they go, yeah. We need taxes, yes, but it's to cut inflation. It's to cut. We're not using the taxes to fund spending. Like I told you just before, all the spending is seniorage. Seniorage funds all the spending. Money creation, aka seniorage, that's the thing that funds all the spending. The taxes are just to offset the inflation of the spending. And you're like, oh my God, okay, so it seems like we've come full circle here, haven't we? Taxes don't fund spending. Seniorage does, but seniorage causes inflation, which we need to use taxes to offset. Taxes don't fund spending, but it turns out they're needed for spending. Unless, of course, the economy is operating under capacity, and then you have more room to do fiscal monetary stimulus, blah, blah, blah. Everyone knows basic Keynesian insight there. Like that's like most of it. And, I wrote a piece about this, and I was like, this is like, what the fuck are we doing with this? Like, honest to God, what seems to be happening here is they're trying to trick people by using this idiosyncratic way of describing government spending as saying it's all seniorage, it's all seniorage, it's all seniorage, and then sort of being tricky about how they talk about it. And so they just saying taxes don't fund spending and just kind of leaving it out there without explaining what I just explained here about, oh, well, yeah, that's seniorage, but you need taxes to offset the inflation of seniorage, etc. Without doing that part. Just being like, taxes don't fund spending, and just kind of, like a magician just sort of like disappearing. And then that causes a lot of people to go, oh, they're saying we could have Nordic style welfare state without higher taxes. That must be what they're saying. If taxes don't fund spending and all spending is self-financed, etc., then that must be what they're saying. And frankly, they seem to lean into that misunderstanding, and they seem to tolerate and almost sort of try to fan the flames of that understanding. For, I don't know, what seemed to me to be sort of weird, I don't know, like sort of cynical political reasons, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the thing that's weird to me about it is, okay, maybe you can get some traction by tricking some people with these sort of word games about seniorage versus taxes and so on. But like when the rubber hits the road, you could have told them 100 million times that taxes don't fund spending and we can just print money and so on. But when the rubber hits the road and we do indeed have to raise tax, you'll have spent the last, 5 years rather than convincing people that taxes are good and you should be happy to pay them because it really, you get what you pay for, and, you're going to get free healthcare and free childcare and all these goodies. You've instead sold them on this sort of bullshit thing. And then when the time comes, they're going to feel like you've lied to them, and you may not be successful because you may not be able to get the taxes that you need to make it happen. So that was one of my takes. But more generally, I think an easier way to think about this, an easier way to talk about MMT and to talk about this whole area that doesn't require you to even think about the concept of seniorage or inflation or, how does the Fed work? How does the Treasury work? How does the automated clearinghouse work? Or like all this sort of weird nitty gritty like electronic transfer shit, is to just take all that out of your head for a second, right? Stop thinking about money. Stop thinking about treasury bonds. Stop thinking about tax rates. Just ignore all of that, right? And just think about real resources, right? Money is a tool of circulation. It's a tool of coordination. It's a tool of helping us plan and allocate things. And it's actually a very effective tool. It seems to me like it seems to do a lot of really good things as a sort of unit of account and unit of value and that sort of thing. But it's not the economy, right? Like fundamentally, the economy are the 150 million plus people who go to work every day, and all the land and all the buildings and all the equipment and all of the real physical capital, the material, right? The economy are the workers and the material, including the flows of material that come from the forests and the mines and the the oceans and the farms and so on. Like you got the material flows and you've got the labor flows, and the material comes together, meets with the labor flows, and you produce stuff, right, that we all get to consume. And isn't that wonderful? That's the real economy, right? And if you want to do something different than we're doing now in the economy, you have to change the way those real resources are being used, right? Now, when you're operating under capacity, that is to say you have a lot of idle workers, a lot of idle material, a lot of idle buildings that just aren't being used, then you got some space to just like, oh, we could just get those folks, and if we can activate them and get them, doing what we want, what we're trying to do, then we can do new shit without having to interfere with the existing, productive resources, right? Another way to put it is we can get an unemployed person working, and that way we don't have to take someone out of the job that they're doing right now, right? And that's all well and good, basic Keynesianism and so on. But short of that, once the economy is going and sort of running on all cylinders, you got all your workers going out every day doing shit. You got all your materials that are being used. All the steel is going somewhere. All of the food is going somewhere. At that point, if you want to change the economy in some way, right, you got no option, but you got to change. You got to take from someone, I guess, better way to put it. Right? If all the workers are engaged, or basically all the workers are engaged, and you want to do something new, like let's say build a shitload of solar panels, you got to take those workers from somewhere, right? They got to come from somewhere. And whatever they were producing before has to stop being produced. And whoever was enjoying that production before has to stop enjoying that production before. And the same thing if you want to redirect materials. If you want to say, oh man, we've been using all these plastics for this or that, but now we really need to get a shitload of plastics ready so that we can build, whatever, green infrastructure or whatever. Those plastics, whatever they were being used for before, that shit's got to stop being made, right? Because there's only so many plastics to go around. There's only so much aluminum to go around or whatever. And so that stuff's got to be moved into the new stuff. And so there's nothing, any sort of financing trick, whether you do it with taxes or borrowing or money creation, seniorage, there's nothing any of that is ever going to do to disrupt that basic reality that you have real resources in an economy, workers, materials, labor flows, material flows. And if you want to change them, you got to do something that moves them around. And that's going to cost someone somewhere, right? Someone's going to have to take the hit. If we got to take 30 million of our workers and get them doing, retrofitting homes, building the solar panels, building the nuclear plants, building the seawalls. But if we've got to get 30 million of our workers out there doing that every day, the stuff, that's 30 million less, workers to do whatever they used to be doing, right? Maybe they used to be they used to be producing X, Y, and Z. X, Y, and Z is not going to be produced anymore, right? There's no way around that. And so that really kind of drives home the inherent trade-off nature of trying to change an economy. Someone's getting traded off somewhere. Someone's ox is getting gored, right? And so that's really important to keep in mind, because when you go about trying to change the economy in some way, meaning that you want to change what's being produced and who gets to receive production, who gets to actually consume what's produced, you should think about what policy mechanisms will allow you to allocate the change in the way that you want. To be less abstract about it, if you really want to, take 20 million workers and have them do other shit because we need to get ready for climate change and that sort of thing, maybe you should think about taxing the rich to fund that, because then you can kind of allocate the cost of that onto the rich. Not because taxes fund spending or whatever, like you can describe it metaphysically however you want, right? But what that tax does is it ensures that the people who really bear the brunt of the fact that 20 million workers are now being used for other shit, you ensure that the rich bear the brunt for that. You ensure that they're the ones who have to consume less. They're the ones who have less control over investment, right? You cut their consumption, you cut their investment. And then by cutting that, you make room for you to do what you need to do in, say, a Green New Deal or Medicare for All or whatever, right? And I think that's the way to think about it, right? Just ignore for a second all the money, all that kind of stuff, and just say, what are we trying to do, right? And what kind of economy are we trying to build? Well, here's an idea. We want people producing less yachts, and more, healthcare, right? We want people producing less, ultra luxury handbags. We want to take those workers and instead have them, retrofitting homes. We want to, just go down the line. Whatever is the sort of, the ridiculous shit that rich people consume, private jets or whatever. We're trying to take the workers who are doing that stuff and say, stop producing private jets for people. Stop producing, $50,000 handbags for people. Stop producing yachts. Stop, like, all that stuff. All these workers and millions of people we have doing that stuff. Let's stop them. Let's take them away from doing that shit and have them, stop catastrophic climate change. And if you start from that without ever talking about money or taxes or whatever, you start to see very clearly, oh, here would be a way to do that. The reason they're making all those yachts and handbags and so on, the reason we've got so many of our workers waking up every day to produce that shit is because rich people have a lot of money and they're buying that shit. And so if we just took the money, they wouldn't buy that shit anymore, and then those workers could be used to produce other stuff, right? That is sort of the fundamental wisdom of tax the rich. It's not, well, because we need to finance this or that. No, it's a way of allocating, in a very real sense, the real economic cost of what we're trying to do. Right? To allocate who's actually eating the fact that we need these millions of workers and we need to find them somewhere. Whose ox are we gonna gore to do that? And the answer is, or should be, as much as possible, the affluent. Right? And that's what taxing the rich gets you. So, we can fight all day about whether seniorage really funds everything. Are we talking about economic realities? Are we talking about legal realities? Are we talking about, some deep metaphysical reality? We could do that all day,
But as a practical matter, like I've said in my pieces, it seems to have very little significance about what we need to do in order to, make sure the people who we want to eat the costs of our programs actually do eat the costs of our programs. And the sort of surgical tool for doing that is the tax. That is the easiest way. You want to make sure the rich eat it, then you tax them. That's not to reduce their power, no, just to like reduce their ability to command millions of workers to produce stupid shit for them. That's really what we're not their political power or something like that, but no, like we need to get you to stop buying yachts, because we can't have all these workers and all this material going in to build this stupid shit, right? We need that for other stuff. That's what the tax is about. So yeah, again, hopefully that wasn't too rambling. I've noticed with these podcasts, it seems much more rambling in my head than it comes off, I think, when I listen to it after the fact. So hopefully that's the case here as well. Thanks for listening to the solo episode. Like I said, we're going to be back full strength soon. Keep on keeping on.